Let's do a side-by-side comparison between Exchange Server 2019 and Microsoft 365, which has been rebranded from Office 365. So we're in Exchange Server 2019 right now, and we can see in our Exchange Admin Center the recipients, permissions, and all that kind of thing on the left-hand side, as well as various other options that are pretty familiar to you if you've used Exchange Server 2016 or 2013 at the top. So let's take a look before we go into a little bit more detail at Microsoft 365. So here's Microsoft 365's starting page. However, you may want to get to the Exchange portion so you can do your Exchange administration. So if you click on Admin, it takes us to a new link. And in this new page, you can simply manage Exchange this way using this really easy to use portal, or you can go to the Exchange Server admin interface as well. So if I were to add a new user here, I would just click on Add User, and I would put in all of my basic information, and then I would choose the type of product license, and then I would be done. But that's sort of a very simplistic way of managing Exchange. There's a lot of other things that we can do with Exchange that you can't do with this easy Admin Center portal. So what you want to do is you want to click on the Show All tab, and at the very bottom you'll see Exchange. And when I click on Exchange, now we're going to see a web page that looks almost exactly like Exchange Server 2019. And if I click on mailboxes, for instance, look at that. It looks almost exactly the same. So here we are seeing the two different products side by side, and although they're very similar, there are some slight differences. So for instance, on the Exchange Server 2019 that we have over here on the left, if I wanted to create a new mailbox under mailboxes, I would click the plus and choose either a user mailbox or a linked mailbox. So let's choose a standard user mailbox. So I would go in and add the alias and add the username, the password, and I could also set more options as well. Now in the Exchange portal using Office 365, now called Microsoft 365, you don't see an option to create the mailbox, and that's because you need to create the mailbox in that easy portal that we saw earlier. So once you add the user and add the license, then that user will show up in the Microsoft 365 Exchange interface. However, once it does show up, as I've created these users right here, if we double click on them, then we can see very similar management types of options. There we go. We see the general mailbox usage, contact information. That's all pretty much the same. I can click on email address, for instance, here, email address, for instance, here, and make any changes I need to. There are some other similarities and differences as well. Let's click on resources. Now on resources, this is going to be a little bit more the same because we have the option here to create a room mailbox or an equipment mailbox. And there's no license required for a room or an equipment mailbox at this time. Now Microsoft may change that in the future, but right now you can create one both in Microsoft 365 or in Exchange Server 2019. So a room and a equipment mailbox, which is part of under the resource mailboxes, basically is so you can reserve conference rooms or conference room equipment, that kind of thing. Let's go to compliance management. And we can see in Exchange Server 2019, we have all of these options: auditing, data loss prevention, retention policies, things like that. However, in Microsoft 365, it says, hey, we're not really using this way. And this has to do with the in-place discovery searches. It even suggests if you're doing Exchange Hybrid, where you're using Exchange Server 2019 and Microsoft 365, to just go ahead and use that interface instead. If we go to Mail Flow here and Mail Flow here, we see that message trace is offered in the Mail Flow link, but it's not in the Mailflow link in the Exchange Server 2019. So that's actually under a different menu, but they're still both there. We also see that we have receive connectors and we have send connectors in Exchange Server 2019, and we see the 5 default connectors. Those connectors are not the same in Microsoft 365. We see there are no receive connectors. However, the connector that does show up is actually just a send connector. Now, by default, there are no send connectors set up, so you would actually have to set this up if you wanted a send connector to go to any other location other than just out to the internet in general. For instance, if you had a mail server that needed to go to a specific address instead of what the DNS is telling you, you could set up a send connector for that. However, in Exchange Server 2019, email will not go anywhere unless you set up an outbound send connector. The outbound send connector in Microsoft 365 is already set up. It just doesn't show you that outbound send connector in this list. But if you don't set up a send connector, it will work just fine without doing anything, but only in Microsoft 365. If we go to protection in both products, we see that there's a malware filter set up that you can go in and either edit the default filter, or you can create a new filter rule if you'd like. However, in Microsoft 365, you not only have that, but you also have a connection filter, a spam filter, outbound spam, quarantine, all different kinds of things. And it doesn't mean that those things aren't available in Exchange Server 2019, but a lot of the things that you need to set up may have to be done through PowerShell instead of through a web interface. We also see there's a unified messaging option here in Microsoft 365, and you don't see that option in Exchange Server 2019. And that's because Exchange Server 2016 was the last version to have unified messaging, and as of this time, Microsoft 365 is still based on Exchange Server 2016. So although the menus are very similar, there's going to be some differences, such as the missing unified messaging in 2019. We also see a servers option in Exchange Admin Center for Exchange Server 2019, and you don't see the servers in Microsoft 365, and that's because all of the servers are on the back end. You don't have control over Microsoft servers. You're on a shared server environment with a lot of other companies, whereas if you have it on-premise, then you have total control over it. So here I can add servers, I can add database availability groups, so I can have multiple copies of things. I can create databases, delete databases, create virtual directories, certificates I can add, and all that stuff is provided by default in the back end on your Microsoft 365 account, so you really don't have to mess with that. One thing of note is that Microsoft does not back up the Exchange server in Microsoft 365, or also known as Office 365 as it used to be, and that's because they simply use database availability groups with lagged copies. So what that means is that they have many different copies of your email database. They also have a copy that's like a day or a week, I'm not sure the exact amount of time, but it's behind in time from your synchronized copy. And what that's good for is if there's any type of database corruption or data loss because of malware or some other issue, then they can go back to that lagged copy, which has not synchronized with any sort of corruption, and they can restore your email that way. So that's why they don't back up. However, you do have the option now to use a Veeam backup with Microsoft 365. You simply choose that, pay for it. You can order some storage up on Azure, and then you can use that as your backup. You can also copy it from there back to your on-premise if you'd like. So there's your two differences between Exchange Server 2019 and Microsoft 365. If you'd like to know more about this, you can reach out to me through email or also visit technet.microsoft.com, and I do have several LinkedIn Learning courses on both of these products that you can check out at linkedinlearning.com.